Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Welcome to lecture number 3 of the course Object Oriented Programming. First, let's see what we have covered in the previous lecture, lecture number 2. We have write a simple C++ program that uses cin and cout. Cin is used to take value input from the user during the execution of the program, and cout is used to display the string to the computer screen, that is standard output. It's same like the printf function, and cin is like the scanf function. The member function with parameters, we have seen the class member function that we can write the definition, or we can write the member function that we can pass the parameter to these functions. We have seen some examples in the previous lecture, that is gradebook class, a simple book class, and a distance class. Then we have seen what is a set function and what are the getter functions. So setter and getter functions are basically setter function are those functions using which you can set the value of the private data member of the object, and get function are those functions using which you can get or acquire the value of the private data member of the object. Then we have seen a little about the constructor in our previous lecture. In today's lecture, we will see a little bit more detail of the constructor by using an example program, and then we can see that we can place the classes in a separate file and the main function in the separate file, and then compile these two files and execute them. Then a destructor with example program. What is a destructor? And then example program, and a constructor with argument and example program. In the previous class, we have seen a distance class having two data members, that is feet and inches, and member functions are setDest, getDest, initialize, and showDest functions. We have seen this class in the previous lecture. So in this class we have we initialize the data member of the class. So distance class shows two ways to initialize the data member item in the object, and these two ways are by calling the initialize function. So initialize function will automatically initialize, when you call that function, it initialize the private data member of the object with the 0 value, and setDest function will initialize the values you will provide to the setDest function, the values you are passing to the setDest function. It will initialize the private data member feet and inches of the object of type distance with the values you are providing to the setDest function. Let's go to the previous slide and see this program. Just a quick go through. So this is a setDest function. You pass these values and it will assign these values to the private data member of the object, and this is the initialize function that initialize the private data member of the object with 0, right? So these are the two functions by using which you can initialize the private data member of an object. So you have to call these functions explicitly. Explicitly means that you have to call that function. Actually, it will not be called automatically. So can an object be initialized, or can an object's private data member be initialized whenever it is created without requiring a separate call to the member function? In the previous two cases, in the previous two functions, initialize and setDest, we have to call the functions explicitly after creating the variable in order to initialize the private data member of the object. But what if we have a way in which the object's data member, private data member, are automatically initialized with some value when they are created? Yes, we have the way, and that is called the automatic initialization. It is carried out by using a special member function called a constructor. So by using constructor, you can initialize the private data member of an object implicitly. Implicitly means that it will do it automatically. You just create an object, for example distance d1 semicolon. So you just create an object. Now in the back end, when the object is created, The object is created means that the memory is allocated for that object, right? And behind the scene, the constructor will be called. And when the constructor is a special function that is called automatically whenever an object of that class is created. So if you create 100 objects, so for every object, that constructor will be called implicitly, that is automatically. A constructor is a member function that is executed automatically whenever an object is created. So एक object create करें या 10 या 100, so for every object created, the constructor will be called automatically by the C compiler, right? Constructor. C++ requires a construct call for each object it has created. So this ensures that the object is initialized properly before it is used. So whenever you create an object, you want that its private data member should be initialized before further using that object. So how they are properly initialized? You make sure this thing by having a constructor in the class definition and initializing within this constructor the private data member of that object, so that whenever a new object of that class is created, the constructor is called and the private data member of that object are initialized with some values. So if there is no constructor, the compiler provides a default constructor, that is a constructor with no parameter. So name of the constructor function is same as the name of the class. Let's see the example of the counter class, a counter class example, in which we have a data member count and the member function are the constructor, increment count, inc underscore count, and get count. So increment count, the return type of the increment count is void. It just increment the count by one value. And get count, the return type of that function is int. So in this class we have only one private data member, that is count. So the object of this class is used to count some kind of event or some kind of occurrence, and we have three functions. The first function is the constructor and the two functions are the increment count and decrement count. We will see the class and execute it, but before going to the DevC editor and see this class, let's go into the detail, a little bit detail of this class. This is called an automatic initialization. An object of type counter is first created. We want its count to be initialized to 0. Now, what are the options? The options are, we can have a set count functions, call it with an argument of 0. So set count को आप 0 value pass कर दें, उसको initialize कर देगा. That is the one mechanism. The other mechanism is the 0 underscore count function to set count to 0. So that is the second option. You have a function, you are not passing any value to that function. You just say, okay, whenever I call the 0 underscore count function with the object of the counter class, it initializes the count private data member of that object by 0, right? So these are the two options. So such functions would need to be executed every time we create a counter object. So whenever you create an counter object, you have to explicitly mention these functions call in order to initialize the private data member of that object, right? Or in order to initialize that object, we can say. That is, so if you create an object of counter C1, you have to call C1 dot 0 underscore count or C1 dot set count 0. So one of these functions should be called, so in order to make sure that the object C1 is initialized with 0. Now a programmer may forget to initialize the object after creating it. That is possible. So it is more reliable and convenient to cause each object to initialize implicitly when it is created. So implicit means that automatically. So user or programmer do not have to care about it, right? So if I write the constructor in the definition of the class, so I know that within that constructor I write some statements to initialize the private data member of the object whenever it is created. So in the main function or in any other function outside the class definition, I can simply create an object counter C1 or C2, and then the constructor will be called automatically, implicitly, and it will initialize the private data member of that object by some initial value. So in the counter class, the constructor counter is called automatically whenever a new object of type counter is created. So we have two objects now. We have, in this statement we create two objects C1 and C2. The counter constructor will be called for each of these objects, that is for C1 and for C2 separately. So this creates a two objects. Constructor is called with each object separately. Let's go and see the program. Okay, so this is the counter class. Here is the constructor, right? And this is how we can initialize the private data member of the object of that class with a value 0. We can write it like this here, or we can write it the function name, the function bracket, colon, name of the variable, and within bracket the value with which you want to initialize. So we want to initialize the count with 0. Now here the count is unsigned int. The unsigned means that it can only contain the positive value. It is not possible to assign the negative value to count variable, right? So with this value it will be initialized. It will initialize with the value 0, right? Okay, and then we have the increment count function that increment the private data member of the object of class counter, and get counter will return the value of the counter. Now in main function we are going to create two objects C1 and C2. For each of these objects the constructor will be called. So let me write some kind of statement over here. So let's see, constructor is called, right? So whenever the constructor is called, this will be printed. Okay, and then so for C1 C2 it should print 2 times constructor is called, and then we have a statement C1.getCount, C1.getCount. So getCount will return the count that will be printed over here. The value returned by getCount function is an integer type value, that is the value of the count for C1 object and for C2 object. So C1 के लिए value 0 है, C2 के लिए भी 0 है, because we have just initialized it. Now we increment the count object. We increment count C1 object 1 time and C2 object 2 times. Then we print the value. Here we get 1 and here we should get 2. Now let's compile and execute this program. Now you can see the constructor is called because we have created 2 objects. Then we print the value of these 2 objects using getCount function. Okay, getCount function, and then we increment C1 1 time and we execute increment count function 2 times with object C2, right? So then we print it again. The value is 1 and 2. So this is the purpose of the constructor, that is called, it is called automatically. Let's create another object and another object and compile and execute it. Now constructor is called, this is 4 times. It appears 4 times because we have created 4 objects now, right? Okay, now the constructor name. First, constructor name must be same as the name of the class. This is one way the compiler knows that they are constructor. So compiler has to know that has to identify the constructor from the set of the public function in the definition of any class. So how it can identify? The one way is the constructor name is same as the name of the class, and second, no return type is used for the constructor. It is not possible to return any value from the constructor. Why? Because there is no mechanism to cache these values. For example, if you go to the program again and you can see, so when we create an object C1, the constructor will be called and it will make the count 0 and print the message. And what if it returns some value, then how we are going to cache this value over here? Can we write like this, x is equal to C1, so whatever the value returned by this constructor, whatever the value returned by the constructor called for object C1 will be assigned to X. That will be a error actually, so you cannot write anything like this. So second, no return value is used for the constructor. Why not? Since the constructor is called automatically by the system, there is no program for it to return anything. To a return value would make no sense, and a return value would make no sense, that we have already seen. So this is the second way the compiler knows that they are actually the constructors. Now initializer list. What is the initializer list in the constructor? So one of the most common tasks a constructor carries out is initializing data members. That we have seen that we want to initialize the data member automatically, implicitly, whenever we create an object. So for that we use a constructor. That is one of the tasks, one of the most common tasks of the constructor. In the counter class, the constructor must initialize the count member to 0. The initialization take place following the member function declarator but before the function body. So this is the place for the initialization within the constructor, but you can write the initialization statement within the body of the constructor as well. So initializing a constructor's function body is like this, but this approach is not preferable. However, this approach will work. So you can initialize it like this, but this is not a preferable approach. So preferable approach is that you have a constructor name, it is then preceded by a colon, the value is placed in parentheses following the data member data. So after the constructor name you have the colon, then you have the name of the data member, then within the parentheses you write the value with which you want to initialize the count variable, count private data member. So अगर मैं यहाँ पे 10 value mention कर दूंगा, it will always initialize it with 10, and then the brackets for the function counter. If multiple members it must be initialized, they are separated by commas like this. So you have a sum class that has the private data member M1, M2 and M3. So you can initialize M1 with 7, comma, the second data member and the third data member. So this is called the initializer list. So you are going to initialize the value of the private data member in the constructor, and the constructor will be called whenever the object of that class is created. Now this is all about the constructor. I hope you understand the concept of the constructor. We will see the constructor in more detail today, but before that let's see how we can place a class in a separate file. We have a header file and we have a main function file called cpp, and header file is basically .h file. Now within the header file we have the definition of the class, and that is not an executable file because it doesn't include the main function, and it is included in .cpp file. Include.h file containing class definition. Executable file, it is an executable file because it contains the main function, so every C program that contains the main function is actually the executable. Let's go to the program and see how we can write a separate class in a separate file and main function in a separate file. So this is the .h file, right? And in this file we just have the definition of the gradebook class. So this is the definition of the gradebook class. It has a public functions, that is the first one is the constructor, it has the same name as of the class, and we are passing some value to that constructor, right? So before that we have seen that we have a default constructor, but here the constructor, here we have the constructor by in which we are passing some value. And what the constructor will does, it again called the set course name function. We'll see what is this function. So set course name function is the function. You can pass string name to that function, and it assign that name to the course name, where course name is the private data member of the object. So this is the private data member whose type is string. So by using the string class you can assign any string to name, right? And you it is the same as you write a character array, but here you get rid of all those things that are associated with the character array, the limitation, its limitation that how many characters you are able to store inside that character array and all those stuff. So you can get rid of this by just using the string class and its object, right? So name is an object of string class. Here name is an object of string class. So within the constructor you're calling set course name function and passing it the name. आप इसी को नेम पास कर रहे हैं बजाय इसके कि कोर्स नेम इज इक्वल टू नेम यहाँ पर स्टेटमेंट लिखें. That task is already performed by the set course name. So what you can do is you can just simply call that function within the constructor. That is perfectly fine, there's no problem. So this name will be copied over here, and then this name is copied to the course name. Then we have a get course name function. So that is a getter function and this is the setter function. So इसमें ये हमारे पास setter function है and this is the getter function that is used to get the value or acquire the value of the private data member of the object of that class. Display message function will display the message welcome to the gradebook for, and then get course name. So get course name will return a string that is going to be appear over here, right? That's it. So let's open the corresponding file, that is .cpp file. So this is the corresponding file, and so here you can see the first statement is we are going to include gradebook.h file in that cpp file. So what does this hash include mean? Hash include is the preprocessor directive that tells the compiler that before compiling that program include gradebook.h file, and within the gradebook.h file we have included iostream, we have included string using namespace std and the definition of our class, right? So that is included before main in the library.cpp file. This is library.cpp file, and within the main we are creating two objects, gradebook1 and gradebook2. So the title of the gradebook, the information we are going to pass gradebook1 is this one, CS101, introduction to C++ programming, and the object gradebook2 we are passing the value CS102 data structure in C++. Then we are going to display the initial value of the course name for each gradebook. So gradebook1 created for course gradebook1.get course name, and gradebook for created for case 2, that will appear as it is, and then we are calling the function get course name with the object gradebook. So get course name object will return the name of the course, right? Now compile the program and execute it. Let me change the font size. Now it displays the same thing, right? So this is how you can write the definition of the class in a header file, and then you can have a cpp file where you can use that class file. So why we have things like this, or why it is preferable to have a class in a separate file? Because it is quite possible that you can use that class that you have defined in .h file in your other program. So you have main program, main program, main program in all three files, and maybe they are all using the same class, right? That is one of the mechanism to include the file, header file, to write everything in the header file and include it in your program. Now let's see what is a destructor. Destructor is a function that is called implicitly when an object is destroyed. Same as we have a constructor that is created, that is executed whenever the object is created. So the destructor is something that is called implicitly, that is called automatically as whenever an object is destroyed. So what does destroy mean? Destroy means that the memory allocated for that object will be taken back by the operating system or by the program, and the object is free now. Then this means that object is destroyed. It is no more a living entity, we can say. So the name of the destructor for a class is the tilde character followed by the class name. So name of the constructor is same as the name of the class, but name of the destructor is same as the name of the class, but it is followed by the tilde sign. No argument and no return value for a constructor. So you cannot pass destructor. So you cannot pass any argument value, and no return type of that destructor will be presented. The most common use of destructor is to deallocate memory that was allocated for the object by the constructor. So in the constructor, what you do is you allocate a memory using a new function. Let's say 24 bytes you have allocated using a new function, and then in destructor you free that. You need to free that memory. Basically you need to free that memory before exiting from the program. But we have a destructor in the class definition. We can have a destructor in class definition. So what we can do is we can write the code of freeing the memory within the destructor, and then when an object is destroyed or the main function exit or the program exit, then the destructor will be called automatically and it start deleting these objects from the main memory. Let's go and create write a create and destroy class. Create and so this is the class, and let's make two private data member. Int id and string s1, let's say string s. So these are the two private data member in the class, and the functions are just the constructor and destructor. So create and destroy, okay. So this is the constructor of the class create and destroy, and within that constructor what we are going to do is we initialize the id let's say this is the constructor with argument, right, with parameter. Okay, we can write simply create and destroy. This is a constructor, and we have a cout in the constructor, that is say I am a constructor, right, and line. Then we have a destructor that start with tilde and then the class name create and destroy. Cout I am a destructor, right? Okay. So this is our simple class, and now we have a main function, main. We can create an object over here. Let's say we have another function, void create. This is a simple function. It's not a member of a class, so this function is not a member of a class, right? So that's a simple function, and within this function we are going to create an object of create and destroy class. So let's say C1 comma C2 and then give it some pause. Okay, and then from main we are going to just call this function. Now let's see what happened. Create. Okay, so this is our class definition. We just have a constructor and destructor. Okay, we have a data member. We will use this data member as well later on. Then we have a create function, and from main function we are just calling the create function. Now if you remember from the previous course that whenever the function is called, the variable declare inside that function. Now the memory for these variables that are declared inside the function is allocated, right? Whenever the function is called, it starts executing the memory, that the variable that are declared inside that function, the memory for that variable is going to be allocated. Now here what we are going to do is we are calling this function and we are creating two object. So memory allocate hogi, function jab execute hoga. Now what happens when the function ends? So it execute all the statements. Now the control has to be transferred back to the position from where you have called this function, right? Now in that case, when the function is exit or the function execution is stopped, in that case the memory that is allocated for all the variables will be deallocated. That means if you have created an object inside that function, the function is executed, the memory is allocated for that object, the object are created, and when the function exits, the objects are destroyed. So when the object are destroyed, the destructor will be called, right? So when I execute this program, first it will call the constructor two times because we have created two objects, and what it do, it display the message I am constructor, right? And then it display the message I am destructor two times. Why? Because when this create function exits, its execution is finished. After this pause, there is no statement, so the control will be transferred back to the place where we call this function. Let me write over here cout in main. Right? So then it displays two times because it destroyed two objects, C1 and C2, when the create function exits, right? So let's compile. It's just one T with one string. Okay. Create and destroy. Okay. Close. Now when I execute this program, so it displays the message I am constructor two times because you have created two objects over here. And then there is a system pause, so I have to press any key to continue. So I've pressed the key and it displays the message I am destructor, because when the function exits, जब create फंक्शन खत्म होगा, इसकी एग्जीक्यूशन खत्म होगी, now these two objects are destroyed, C1 and C2, जो create and destroy class के objects हैं. So when the objects are destroyed, the corresponding constructor, the constructor in their class, destructor in their class will be called. So when this destructor is called, it display the message destructor, I am destructor. So here it display the message 2 times because 2 objects are destroyed. Then it comes in the main function. In main function, this printf in main function, sorry, cout, and then the system pause function. So this is the system pause function. Press any key to continue. Now within the main function, let's say if we create another object, create and destroy C3, let's say. So we create an object, perfectly fine, it display the message I am a constructor. Okay, let's change the message. Called and destructor is called. Right? And now here when this object is created, it display the message constructor is called, and then system pause, press any key to continue. When we continue that key, the main function exit, the main function exit होगा तो वो डिस्ट्रक्टर कॉल करेगा और इस मैसेज को प्रिंट कर देगा स्क्रीन पर, बट दिस मैसेज विल नॉट बी अपीयर टू अस बिकॉज वो जो स्क्रीन है वो डिसअपीयर हो चुकी होगी. देयर इज नथिंग टू स्टॉप दैट, राइट? C1 C2 2 ऑब्जेक्ट्स हैं, C3 थर्ड ऑब्जेक्ट है. Compile it. So constructor is called 2 times, then press any key to continue. Destructor is called, then in main function we create another object, constructor is called, and then press any key to continue, and it display the message destructor is called and disappear. The screen is disappear then, right? So this is how we can call a destructor, and this example shows that how the destructor and constructors are basically called, and the purpose of these two destructor would be that you can deallocate the dynamic memory that is allocated in the constructor of a class. So whenever you create an object, the dynamic memory is allocated, and when the program exit, all the objects are destroyed, and for each object the destructor will be called and it will free the dynamic memory for that object. We will see that example later on. Now the another thing is validating data with set functions. So we have a set function, and the purpose of a set function is that it is used to set, or it is used to initialize or assign any value to the private data member of the object of that class, right? So what we can do is we can validate the value before assigning to the object of that class. For example, in case of a feet class, we have the feet and inches distance class, we have feet and inches, and as you never heard a distance is -3 and 2 inches. It's an invalid distance, right? Similarly, we cannot have a distance 5 feet and -8 inches. No, that's not a valid distance. So what we can do is we can validate such things in the program. So a set function should validate the value before assigning to the private data member of the class. Set function can return a value or may display a message if invalid data is assigned to an object. So it can return a value from where it is called, and with that return value you can display an appropriate message that the input is invalid, or the set function can display the message by itself. You can do in both of these ways. So let's go to the program. So this is our distance class. Remember this class, distance class. So we have two private data member, feet and inches. So we have a public function set dest, get dest, initialize and show dest. So this is our set function, right? That is used to set the value provided by the user when the user called set dest function with any object. For example, here set dest function is called with the object dest1 and values assigned to that function is 11 and 6.25. Now somebody can assign value -11 and 6.25 and then later on in the program can say that this class gives the wrong value, something like this. So what you can do is you can validate these values before assigning to the private data member of the object of that class. How we can do this? So let me first run it normally and check what is the output. Does it function? Let me change the display setting. Enter feet 12 feet, enter inches 4 inches. So it display that dest1 जो ऑब्जेक्ट है उसकी फीट की वैल्यू 11 है और इंचेस इज 6.25 बिकॉज dest1 को हमने यहाँ पर इनिशलाइज कर दिया था इस तरह से, राइट, 11 and 6.25. देन dest2 की वैल्यू हमने खुद से प्रोवाइड किया बिकॉज वी कॉल द गेट डेस्ट फंक्शन विद dest2 ऑब्जेक्ट and in get dest function we are inputting the value from the user. We are taking input values from the user. It shows 12 and 4, perfectly fine. Now how we can validate input? So what we can do over here is we can have an if statement. If feet is less than 0 or inches is less than 0. So if any of these things is less than 0, we can display the message. There is no need for the bracket, I think. We can display the message cout invalid distance values end line, and in the else part if this is not the case then in the else part we're going to assign the values, right? Okay, now let's first run the program. So enter feet value 12 feet, let's say 5 inches, so perfectly fine. So let's run the same program by calling the set dest function by passing it -6.25 value. Let's see what happened now. And let's have the default constructor as well. So the name of the constructor is distance. Then we have the colon. We want to initialize feet with 0 and comma inches with 0.0. So this is the constructor, default constructor. Now we assign a wrong value to this. Let's see this, if this value is assigned or not, and the message is display or not. Okay, so compile it and execute it. So invalid distance value because the value of the feet inches is -6.25. Okay, now this is the value for the other object. So the value of test1 is 0 0, that is initialized in the constructor, and the value of test2 that we have provided, that is 3 and 4.5. So this is how you can validate the input. So you can have the same thing over here in the getTest function. You can have in two integer values, you can take input here like this, then you can check in the if, और then you can call the function. अब यहाँ पर आप function call कर सकते हैं set test f comma I, because in set test function we are validating the input, right? So instead of writing the whole code, this code in the get test function, we can just call this function set test or set test को हम दो values pass कर रहे हैं, right? Now let's see what happens if we provide the wrong input during the execution. So let's remove the minus sign from here, compile and execute, enter feet. So feet is, let's say, -5 inches, it's 6.78. It displays the message invalid distance. These values are invalid. And then in test1 we initialize it with 11 and 6.25. It display it, but it won't initialize the test2 object, right? The other thing is that you can have a return type of a set test function. For example, you say, okay, set test function return an integer value. So instead of writing this, it returns -1 if the input is invalid. For the other case, it returns one, right? So what we can do is we can check over here. We can have an integer x is equal to distance test1 dot set test. Now with what the value is returned in the main, and we can check with this value whether the input is valid or not, right? And we can display the message accordingly. This is the other mechanism. So this is how we can validate data with the set function. Now constructor with default argument. Let's consider this date class in which we have a 3 private data member, that is month, day and year, and a constructor and a function print function, right? So in the constructor you can see we have 1, 2, 3 parameters, and we have also initialized them with the value 1, 1 and 2000. Now if we call the constructor, so if we create an object of date like date d and then semicolon, so we are not going to provide here in this case any value to the object of date function. In that case it assign the default values. And what are the default values? The values you have mentioned over here, that is 1, 1 and 2000, right? And it will assign 1 to month, 2 to day and 2000 to year, right? And if you call the function like if you create an object of date like date space d2 and then parentheses, and within the parentheses you specify 3 values, then these 3 values will be assigned to m, d and year, and that will be then further assigned to month, day and year, right? So let's go and see the program. So this is the date class. So we are creating a date object d1 without specifying any value. So in that case this constructor will be called, but it assigns the default values. So these are the default values 1, 1 and 2000 to the object d1. And then the constructor 2, we create another object and specify 3 values here, and then again the same constructor will be called, but now the 3 is assigned to m, 4 is assigned to day and 2012 is assigned to y. and that will be assigned to month, day and year in the body of the constructor. And then we are going to print those values. Okay, let's see the output of this program. Let's compile it. And so this is the output. You can see for the first object of a date class D1, when we call the D1.print function, it displays the value 112000, and these are the default value in the constructor, right? But for the second object, we have specified the values, and then it displays those values 3, 4 and 2012, right? So this is how you can specify the default arguments for the constructor, and default arguments are the arguments with which the object's private data member are initialized. So let's see another program that we can pass an object as a function argument. So we can pass a simple data type variable to a function. For example, we can pass an integer, float or character or a string or a structure to a function. Same like these, we can pass an object to a function as an argument. So for that, let's consider the distance class. So this is our distance class. So in this class we have two private data members. So these are the two private data member of the class, float inches and integer feet. And then we have a default constructor. So this is the default constructor, and then we have a constructor with two argument. So we can overload the constructor. This is called the constructor overloading. Same is the way as you can do the function overloading. We will see this thing. So now this is the default constructor. The default constructor is the one that has the no argument, and this is the constructor with two argument, 1 and 2. So these are the two argument for the constructor, and we are initializing the private data member with these values, with these argument, right? And there's nothing in the function body. Then we have a getDest function. So in getDest function, it is the same as we have seen in the previous class. We are going to take input value from the user. Then we have the showDest function. In the showDest, we are going to display the value of the feet and inches on the computer screen. Now there is another function, that is addDest function, and in addDest function we are passing an object of distance type, and the second parameter is also an object of distance class. Now we just specify the prototype of the function inside the definition of a distance class. So it is possible to write the definition of the member function of the class outside the definition of the class, right? But for that function, the prototype of that function must be mentioned inside the definition of the class. So जिस फंक्शन की डेफिनेशन आपने, जिस मेंबर फंक्शन की डेफिनेशन आपने क्लास की डेफिनेशन से बाहर लिखनी है, उस फंक्शन की प्रोटोटाइप यू हैव टू मेंशन इनसाइड द डेफिनेशन ऑफ द क्लास, right? Now this is the definition of the distance addDest function. So here you can see this is a new thing. This double colons are called scope resolution operator. These double colons are called scope resolution operator. Since we are defining addDest function, that is a member function of distance class outside the definition of a distance class, so we have to mention that this function belongs to which class. So this will tell us that the type of the function, return type of the function is void. addDest function belongs to a distance class, and the name of the function is addDest. The first parameter is the distance type object, and the second parameter is also a distance type object, right? And then within a function we are first adding the inches. So what we are doing here is, in addDest function we are adding the two distance objects that are passed as a parameter to that function, and that function will add these two distance and store the result in the private data member of the object with which you call addDest function. तो जिस ऑब्जेक्ट के साथ आपने addDest का फंक्शन कॉल किया था उसके फीट और इंचेस आपके पास डायरेक्टली एक्सेसिबल होंगे इस फॉर्म में, और जोन से ऑब्जेक्ट आपने बाय वैल्यू पास की इस फंक्शन को, उसको आप इस तरीके से एक्सेस करोगे. d2 डॉट इंचेस मींस d2 के इंचेस और d3 डॉट इंचेस मींस d3 के इंचेस, राइट. Then this is the main function. In the main function, first we are going to create two objects. Okay, let me explain one more thing in the addDest function. So we will check, first we add the inches of the two distance and store them in the inches of the private data member, which is the private data member. So this inches is the private data member of the object with which you have called addDest function. You can see over here you call the addDest function with the object dest3, and you are passing dest1 and dest2 objects by value to that function, right. So dest3 object के private data member are directly accessible within the class. So ये directly accessible है feet और inches की form में, ठीक है. So inches को हमने पहले add up कर लिया दोनों distance के, then we check if the inches is greater than 12 or not. If it is greater than 12, then this means that we can subtract 12 from the inches and add 1 in the feet, right, because 12 inches is equal to 1 feet. So if the distance is, let's say 5 feet and 14 inches, it doesn't make sense, it doesn't look okay, right. So we can write 6 feet and 2 inches instead of writing 5 feet and 14 inches, right. So we're doing same thing over here. So we subtract 12 from the inches, we are incrementing feet here, then we come outside the if statement. उसके बाद we are going to add feet, d2 dot feet and d3 dot feet. We are adding these three and then storing the value in the feet, because this is feet plus is equal to d2 dot feet plus d3 dot feet, right. So it is same as x plus is equal to y. This means that x is equal to x plus y, right. So in the main function we are creating two objects, dest1 and dest3 object, right. So the memory is allocated for these two objects, dest1 and dest3, and then we are creating and with these two objects, with dest1 and dest3 object, the default constructor will be called, because we haven't specified any other constructor with these objects. So the default constructor will be called. Now with dest2 object we specified two parameters, that is 11 and 6.5. so we are passing two values. Now in that case, in the case of dest2, in the case of creation of dest2, the constructor with two argument, this constructor, the constructor with two argument will be called, right. And then we are calling getDest function with dest1 object. So dest1 object के feet और inches getDest में directly accessible होंगे. So getDest में आपने feet और inches में input ली user से और वो dest1 के feet और inches में assign कर दी, right. Then the next function call is dest3 dot addDest. So addDest का function call हुआ. So to call any member function you need the object of that class. So ये जो member function है addDest का function, this function is called using dest3 object, and we are passing the value of two objects, that is dest1 and dest2 to this function. Now this is very important to remember that in addDest function the private data member of dest3 3, which are feet and inches, they are directly accessible, while the values of dest1 will be copied to the object d2, and the value of dest2 object will be copied to d3 object, right? जो D3 ऑब्जेक्ट है इस ऑब्जेक्ट में कॉपी हो जाएंगी वैल्यूज. नाउ सेम जिस तरह से हमने पहले पढ़ा था कि अगर एक फंक्शन में कोई वेरिएबल डिक्लेयर करते हैं आप, then that variable is actually the local variable for that function, and when that function start its execution, that variable will be created, local variable of that function, and when the execution of that function exit or ends, then the memory allocated for that function will be deallocated. That means that variable is destroyed. So same happens over here. So these d2 and d3, these are the objects of distance class, but their scope is limited to addDest function. That means they are created when the addDest function is called, and they will be destroyed when the addDest function finished. फिनिश कब होगा? जब इसने सारी स्टेटमेंट एग्जीक्यूट कर ली हैं और दोबारा वो मेन में वापस आ जाएगा कंट्रोल, राइट? So dest1 or dest2 की values they will be copied to d2 and d3, and then we call show dest function with these three objects, dest1, dest2 and dest3. Now in this particular example what we are doing is we create an object, three objects, we initialize the value of the one object by using set dest function, sorry, by using the constructor with 2 argument. There is no set dest function here. We initialize the value of one object with the constructor with 2 argument. This is here, and we initialize the value of one of the object, that is dest1, by taking the input from the user, and then we add up these two distance and store the result in dest3, and then we are going to display these 3 distances. Okay, let's see the figure. So this is addDest function. Now in addDest function, the feet and inches of dest3 they are directly accessible by feet and inches, but feet and inches of dest1 and dest2 are not directly accessible. For that we have to use the object dot feet. So d2 dot feet and d3 dot feet, right? So member function of a dest3 can refer to its data directly, but data in objects passed as an argument is referred to with the dot operator. So जो भी डाटा आपने as a argument object as a argument उस फंक्शन को पास किया है, उस ऑब्जेक्ट के प्राइवेट डाटा मेंबर आप डॉट ऑपरेटर से एक्सेस कर सकते हैं. सो बेसिकली हो क्या रहा है कि यहाँ पर d2 और d3 they are the local object of addDest function. So when this function is called, control will come over here, memory is allocated for d2 and these 3 objects, right? And these values are copied to d2 and dest2 will be copied to d3. Let me show you a simulation. So this is the main function. The first statement is the creation of 2 objects, that is dest1 and dest3. So these 2 objects are created inside the memory and it is initialized with the value 0 and 0 0, and this is the dest3 object, right? And then the second statement. So this is the second statement. When this statement will be executed, it create an object dest2 but initialize it with 11 and 6.5, right? Now the next statement is dest1 dot get dest. This statement, so you are taking the value input. Let's see the get dest function. So this is the get dest function. If you remember it, This is the getDest function. It displays the message enter feet. You enter some feet value, it will store in the feet. So this feet is the private data member of dest1, and this inches is the private data member of dest1 as well. So let's say user input 5, that is stored in the private data member of dest1 object feet, and then user enter 7.0, that is the value for the inches, that will be stored in the private data member inches of the object dest1, right? And then the next statement is the addDest function. So this is the addDest function. Now this is the call to a function addDest, right? And when the function is called, it first creates these two objects, that is d1 and d2. So it creates these two objects d1 and d2. Now the value will be copied. The value of the dest1 will be copied to d1 and the value of dest2 will be copied to d2. So dest1 की जो value है 5 and 7.5, that will be copied to d1, and the value of dest2, that is 11 and 6.5, they will be copied to d2. 11 and 6.5, write this. Okay. Now the next thing is the inches and the feet. Now these inches and the feet are the private data member of the object with which you have called addDest function. So किस object के साथ आपने addDest का function call किया था? dest3 के साथ call किया था. So these are the private data member of dest3, which is this object, right? So inches is equal to d1 plus d1 dot inches plus d2 dot inches. So d1 के inches क्या है? 7 है plus 6.5, that is 13.5. So that will be written over here in this place, right? The next statement is you initialize feet with 0. Which feet? The feet is the private data member of the object with which you have called addDest function, and that is dest3. So you initialize feet with 0, right? And then you are checking in the if statement if inches is greater than or equal to 12. Yes, inches is greater than or equal to 12. The condition is true, it is greater than 12. So what we do is we execute this statement, inches minus is equal to 12.0. So inches minus is equal to 12.0 is same as inches is equal to inches minus 12. So you are subtracting 12 from here, and then you are adding 1 in feet. So subtracting 12 is, the remainder is 1.5, that is written in the inches, and then the feet plus plus. So feet की value 0 है, now it is 1. It comes outside the if statement, then the statement is feet plus is equal to d1 dot feet plus d2 dot feet. The statement is same as feet is equal to d1 dot feet plus d2 dot feet plus feet. So feet is 1, d1 dot feet is 5, that is 6, and d2 dot feet is 11. Now 6 plus 11 is 17. Now the 17 will be written in feet. So here it is written, 17 will be written. Now this is the execution of addDest function. So when the addDest function finish its execution, the object, the local object of addDest function, that is d1 and d2 objects, these are local to this function, they will be destroyed, right? The next function is the showDest function. It is used to display the value of the private data member of the objects. So first we call dest1 dot showDest. So सबसे पहले dest1 की जो private data member है उसकी value display होगी like this. So dest1 is equal to now it call the function dest1 dot showDest. showDest में क्या हो रहा है? feet colon inches. किस feet की value? dest1 के feet की value, that is 5, and inches dest1 के, that is 7. Similarly dest2 and dest3. So this is the end of our lecture number 3. I hope you understand the concept of default constructor and constructor with 2 arguments, and how we are going to write the function outside the class definition. We will continue from here in the next lecture. Thank you very much.